Good morning, kids. So, what we are doing today is a very basic topic from photosynthesis, that is going to be how pigments, that is photosynthetic pigments, are absorbing light energy. Let's assume that we have this pigment that is going to be pigment X. This pigment X absorbs a light of 500 nanometer from visible region. Okay, now when this pigment will absorb light from visible region, it will excite its electron and the electron will move to its excited state. Now these electrons, they do not stay in excited state for a long period of time, and in a while they will come back to ground state. Now when this electron comes back to ground state, when this transition is taking place, that is transition from excited state to ground state, when this transition takes place, this transition releases energy. Why will this transition release energy? And the energy which is released is going to be less than the absorbed energy. And why the energy will be less than absorbed energy? Because some amount of energy is used in excitation, some amount of energy is used during resonance transfer. So whatever energy will be released is going to be less than the absorbed. Now this released energy can be lost as heat, or it can be lost as light, or it can give luminescence, or it can be absorbed by some other pigment, or it can be transferred to some other pigment. When this energy is transferred to some other pigment, let's say this is my pigment X, I have three other pigments, pigment A, pigment B, and pigment C. Now tell me to which of these pigments, let's say pigment A is absorbing the energy of 450 nanometer, pigment B will be absorbing energy of 550 nanometer, and pigment C is absorbing an energy of 400 nanometer. Now pause the video, think for a while to which of the given pigments will the energy be transferred. So your immediate thought would be that as the energy which is released is less than the absorbed energy, energy could either be transferred from pigment X to A or C. But remember your law in chemistry. Chemistry में आपने पढ़ा है that E is equal to Hc by lambda. That is, E is going to be inversely proportional to lambda. So as energy increases, lambda, that's going to be your wavelength, that decreases. Okay, so as the energy which is absorbed released is less than what was absorbed, so the energy from this pigment X, when the electron comes back to ground state, will be passed on to a pigment which is having a higher wavelength than the pigment. Now where and how is it useful when we are talking about photosynthesis? So let's talk about how is it useful. So this is useful during the light reaction of photosynthesis. Now let's see the arrangement of pigments on the membrane of thylakoid first. So on thylakoid membrane, we have a reaction center chlorophyll A. This is going to be our reaction center chlorophyll A. This reaction center chlorophyll A usually absorbs around 680 to 700 nanometer. Let's say the reaction center here is absorbing 680 nanometer of wavelength. Then we have several antenna pigments which are present surrounding this reaction center chlorophyll A. So if we talk about antenna pigments, they will be arranged on the membrane of thylakoid, something like this. These pigments can be, first, reaction center will always be, when I talk about reaction center, it is always going to be a single molecule of chlorophyll A. The rest of these pigments will form the antenna pigments. In short, also known as LHC, that is going to be light harvesting complex. So these whether you call it as antenna pigments, whether you call it as light harvesting complex, or whether you call it as accessory pigments, it's all going to be the same. So antenna pigments, light harvesting complex, as well as accessory pigments, they all mean the same. So here, reaction center was one molecule of chlorophyll A. So rest of the photosynthetic pigments, that is going to be your chlorophyll B, carotenoids, as well as xanthophyll. These three will be forming your accessory pigments. Let's talk about the wavelengths at which they absorb the light. Let's say this pigment absorbs at 400 nanometer, this at 450, 480, 520, 560, 600, 620, 640 and 660. Now here we have a very important, extremely important concept, that when the light energy falls, I repeat, when the light energy falls, all of these pigments are excited simultaneously. Very, very, very important statement. When light energy falls, all the pigments will be excited simultaneously. So what will happen is, when this pigment will absorb light energy of 400 nanometer, it will excite an electron. When this electron will come back to ground state, it will release energy. Okay, it is going to release energy. This energy, it can transfer to a pigment with a higher wavelength and lower energy. Remember, we just now said that E is going to be inversely proportional to lambda. So this energy from a pigment with 400 nanometer wavelength can be transferred to a pigment with lower energy and higher wavelength. So it will transfer its energy to the pigment with 450 nanometer. So now what happened was, the pigment with 450 nanometer absorbance got some energy from the pigment having lower wavelength, as well as it had also received its own energy and excited its electron. So both of these energy together will be transferred to a pigment with still lesser energy and higher wavelength. So this is how the energy will be keeping on transferring between the antenna pigments and will get transferred between various antenna pigments. Now, the thing which is very important to note here is that this reaction center chlorophyll A has highest wavelength and it absorbs lowest energy, whereas this pigment is the one which is the most important pigment when we talk about photosynthesis. So all of these pigments' energy will be simultaneously transferred to reaction center chlorophyll A, which is going to be the main center from where your light reaction of photosynthesis starts. Okay. So this class was just basics about how different pigments absorb light energy. In the next class, we will continue with light reaction. Till then, keep on reading. Stay happy. Thank you.